Good afternoon. I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the food enthusiast here at J Moore Living. I'm a food writer, food stylist, PR maven, and a frustrated baker. Those of you joining us live today, just feel free to drop your questions in the comment box and you'll see me turn my head to check and see, and we will ask our guests the questions or let them know about the comments. Today's guest is here live from Cambodia. He is taking his nap. It's 12:30 a.m. in Cambodia. Our guest is John Martin Taylor, or AKA Hoppin' John. He's a culinary historian, cookbook author, and storyteller. His Hoppin' John's Low Country Cookbook has been in continuous print for 30 years. Publications that he's written for: New York Times, Washington Post. His just released, I will call it a memoir, Charleston to Phnom Penh, a Cook's Journal, has just come out. You've seen it in my promos, just so you know what it looks like. His essays take our readers through his journeys across 3 continents, South Carolina Low Country to the Caribbean, Italy, France, Eastern Europe, and Asia. Let's welcome the man who can't resist dancing while cooking. Good morning, John.
Well, it is good morning, I guess. It's 12:30 a.m. here, so it's dark out.
It's dark out here. It's the afternoon. It's just miserable in Baltimore. Congrats on the book just being awarded the 2023 Gourmand Cookbook Award for food writing in Cambodia. How did this book come about?
Oh, let's see. Well, I've been writing about food for 40 years. And before my husband and I moved to Cambodia, he is here as the Peace Corps country director. Before we moved here, I gave my vast culinary library to a culinary school in South Carolina. And I gave my papers, which included all kinds of things, to the College of Charleston, which had been soliciting them for years. And when we got here, I've been through so many different computers, and I've been writing for so long, and some things are lost. I went through a hurricane. I lost a lot of stuff. I started printing out, plus I've had a blog for 15 years. I started printing out a lot of these articles because I wanted to get them all together to add to my archives at the College of Charleston. And the next thing I knew, I had 350 articles. So
quite a bit.
Yeah. So, it is a lot, but if you think about it, 40 years of writing, that's, 12 months, that's 480 months. So that's less than one a month. So it's not that much. If you look at it, it is. Anyway, so I went to the University of South Carolina Press and said, would you be interested in taking a look at this? And this wonderful young editor there that I cannot say enough good about, Aurora Bell. I think we're going to see a lot of wonderful projects come under her editorial guidance. She said, actually, one of the things she said was, yeah, I'd love to take a look at it. She said, how much do you have? And I said, well, I've got 350. And she sort of laughed. And she said, well, maybe send me a third. So I sent her 118 essays. And we worked on it for several months and narrowed it down to 42. So that's how it came about.
How would you describe the book to others?
Well, it's not a cookbook. There are 30 recipes. It's an anthology of my writing, and my writing is largely about food, mostly about food. There are a couple of academic pieces in the book, with footnotes and all that. Um, and but there and as I said, most of the articles are about food, but there are only 30 recipes. Um, it is, I wouldn't exactly call it a memoir, but I think that's how most people are looking at it, as a memoir. I We put the essays in the book chronologically, um, and because the articles were written at different times for different audiences. There are a few repeated details, but it does read like sort of an autobiographical journey through the places I've lived and the things I've eaten. Um,
Right. Right. Um, you do talk about your early family life. Your dad had worked on the Manhattan Project.
yep.
Your mom was an experimental cook, which
Yeah,
was
she was remarkable, way ahead of her time.
unique for being down south. She would try a number of recipes and things she would do that most people weren't doing at that time. Um, do you feel like that had an influence on your
Absolutely,
path?
absolutely, absolutely. I always had the bug. Um, it's funny, my siblings, for the most part, did not get the bug. Um, my sister Sue, who ran my shop for 7 years, we worked together. And she and I were the middle kids, and we were always really close. She was a single mom for much of her life. After she and her husband divorced, and after um, her son went away to college, she became far more interested in food, and she's a great cook now. And she sort of has taken the baton now. But yeah, we always had amazing meals. There was always wine with meal. Of course, as we got older, we were allowed to drink the wine. But yeah, they definitely inspired me.
I'm in reading the book, I believe you said that maybe you didn't stay in the top places, but you ate very well when you traveled.
It's true. That's true. Um, it's true. We traveled all over the country. One summer, my mother put us in the station wagon and took us out west, and we drove, going through all the national parks and up the west coast. And we wouldn't stay in fancy places, but we always ate in the finest restaurants, always. And my father was there was South Carolina back in the 50s and 60s was not like it is now. It was pretty much rural, and he was very involved in the state development board. Fritz Hollings was governor then, and put him on the development board, and they traveled all over the place, bringing industry into the state. So he would go to South America. He was at the opening of Brasilia. South America, he'd go to Europe, and he'd come back with these tales of amazing meals. So,
Well,
wherever
that
he was.
definitely gave you the wanderlust for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And we kept a sailboat in the Caribbean, so we would go down there and sail around. So it was interesting. It was um, a situation where you could they owned the boat with this company, and people rented the boats out, bareboat charters, and they got to use it 6 weeks a year. But they didn't necessarily have to use their boat. They could use somebody else's boat. Their boat was in the Grenadines, but they could use somebody's boat in the Bahamas. Or they would. My father was also a ham radio operator, and so he was the waterway net commander, and up and down the East Coast, and he would talk to his ham radio buddies who were also boaters in, say, Maine, and he'd say, "You want my boat in the Caribbean for 2 weeks. We'd love to have yours in Maine for 2 weeks. So I've sailed up and down the East Coast, know it pretty well, certainly in the waterway.
Right, right. Just to bring up your dad again, in the holiday season, he wrote a book, and in my mind, it's something about how you should bring the children into the kitchen and let them see the family traditions being done. Am I remembering correctly from my early reading of the book?
I'm
Or,
not
or
exactly sure, but what?
did your dad write a cookbook?
No. What my mother wrote a book in the 40s and early 50s, and it was recipes that, as my father says in the introduction, he wrote an introduction to it later. He thinks they were just things that she didn't know by heart, or things that weren't in her usual repertoire. And it's an amazing collection. And she died very young. She died when she was 62. And years later, and my father was remarried. He bought himself a computer. He was 75, I think. Bought himself a computer, taught himself to type, and he transcribed this old fragile manuscript of my mother's and typed it all up. And while he typed, Lila, his wife, checked the recipes, and she baked. And that Christmas, each of us got a copy of the collection. And along with the copy of the book, Lila had baked. There are a lot of cookie recipes in the book, and my mother would make lots and lots of cookies at Christmas. And each of us got a tin of cookies that had a dozen different types of cookies, 12 of each, and each one wrapped up in a little plastic bag, and the plastic bag had the page number of the recipe. It was the finest gift I've ever received, I think. It was a story that I've actually told on NPR before. I've read the article. So my father assembled it.
I know that he, in later years, he acted as an editor for you on your writing and recipes.
He and I had by then he had been the cook at home for 10 years. And because when he remarried, the young woman he married, he said, I'll do the shopping and cooking and you do the cleaning. And it's an agreement they stuck with until his death. And he became very interested, and I would send him things to read. And he had a lot of really good advice, both about language and syntax, but also about flavors and the instructions, the instructions to the cook.
Right. I want to get to what really started bringing you into food history, and it was your cookbook store in Charleston, Hop and John's.
Actually, no. What happened, it was long before that. What happened was I was making my living as an artist, and I was living in Paris. And I applied for the job as the art director of this magazine that was starting. My mother had died. She had a huge collection of cookbooks. And I had come home from Europe and helped my father care for her. And I'd read through her library of books. And I'd also apprenticed with a chef before I had moved to Europe, just to learn some basic skills. It wasn't a career that I was interested in. And I applied for the job as the art director, but somehow or another, Jean-Sébastien Stelly, who was the editor-in-chief of the magazine, picked up on my newfound culinary knowledge and hired me instead as the food editor. and my life changed overnight. The magazine was in French about New York. It was called Ici New York, and we moved to New York. And one of the first things that Jean-Sébastien had me do, both of us together interviewed Karen Hess. And Karen Hess is the grandmother of culinary history. The University of South Carolina Press had just published, this was in 1984, had just published her annotated edition of the Virginia Housewife. And I interviewed her, and culinary history just came alive for me. And I had I literally stumbled across a manuscript cookbook from the early part of the 20th century. I Xeroxed a copy of it for Karen. I gave it to her and showed it to her. I didn't even recognize some of the dishes, and it came from some plantations not an hour from where I grew up. And she encouraged me to go back home and to research the culinary history of the Low Country. And I was thinking about opening a bookstore then, and 2 years later it happened. And in the meantime, I started the research and did it for 7 or 8 years before my first book came out.
Well, let's talk about some things that you helped breathe life back into, which was Carolina gold rice, shrimp and grits.
And more so than the rice. The rice, there was an eye surgeon named Dick Schultz, and Dick was he began planting the rice in the 80s. But more importantly, when I got home to open my bookstore, back to Charleston to open the bookstore, there you couldn't find a lot of whole grains. You might find them in a health food store sitting unrefrigerated, and everybody was eating like Jim Dandy and Quaker oats and Quaker grits, which are ground too fine. They're degerminated. The germ where all the oil is, which is where the flavor is, was gone. It was very hard to find, and it was no wonder that Yankees didn't like grits, because they were totally degerminated. They didn't have any flavor. They taste like the packages they were sitting in. And so I joined an organization called SPOOM, which is the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills. And they hooked me up with a bunch of millers. And I either went to the mills or tasted the grits from some 30 mills before I found a young couple of hours north of Atlanta growing the right kind of corn, the right heirloom corn, growing it the right way, harvesting it the right way, not doing anything unnatural to it, letting it dry to low 16% humidity, grinding it between two blue granite stones, not adding anything to it, taking anything away from it, and shipping it on the day that they grind. And so I started writing about it. I wrote about it for the New York Times. I wrote about it for Gourmet. I think I wrote about it for, I can't remember who else I wrote about it for. Of course, locally, I had a column in an alternative newspaper, and encouraging, and I started selling these whole grains. And the mill did other grains, but I concentrated on corn, grits and cornmeal, and corn flour, a very fine grind. And I started educating my customers about it and getting restaurants to use whole grains, and not only just whole grains, but my whole thing. Since I've become a food writer 40 years ago, since I became a food writer 40 years ago, it's been fresh, local, and traditional. That's my battle cry in the kitchen. And when I was growing up, my mother bought grits and cornmeal at the grocery store, and it wasn't refrigerated. But the mill was 40 miles away, and she'd buy little 1-pound bags, and she'd use it that week. And it was whole grain. We actually called it country grits back then, rather than whole grain. But that's what they were. They were whole grain. That mill is still in business, by the way.
Right. So people getting the stone ground grits and they get it, they need to freeze it or
Yes, keep
refrigerate it.
it in the freezer because you know corn is fine in the grain. We have silos full of it in the Midwest, full of corn. But as soon as you grind it, that the oil that's in the germ is exposed to the air and it oxidizes, goes bad. So whole grain products will go bad if you don't keep them in the freezer. So that's
Right.
but it's
Yeah.
also why, I mean, we all know that oil is what carries flavor. So,
Well,
and
it's
that's
just
what makes it so
right.
delicious.
That's the same thing with cinnamon. It loses, you don't want a large jar. Cinnamon
Yeah.
loses its oil right away, and that'll dissipate. Um, I just want to tell people that to read more, you can go to hoppinjohns.net. His social is Hoppin' Johns on Instagram and Hoppin' John on Facebook. And we have a lot of your friends that have tuned in. Um, Helly Montgomery Dunn. I'm just looking here. Dana Downs. And there were some others, but I've sort of
Those are
scrolled.
both dear friends in Athens, Georgia. Dana is
Okay.
actually, Dana's my best friend. I've known her for, I don't even want to know how long.
Bonnie Cleveland.
Bonnie,
And Bonnie Cleveland, they're watching. I do have a question for you. Is there a specific food or culinary experience that you consider your all-time favorite?
oh, you know, I, wow, all time favorite. You know, that's really, really hard. I've had so many great ones, but my favorite food is oysters. And I grew up spending a lot of time on my parents' sailboat, and mom would say, "Go get lunch." And if it was the R months, from September to April, and it was low tide, I would just go get oysters. And this is before South Carolina was developed the way it is now. And to get a fresh oyster right off the banks, and this is the May River behind Hilton Head long before, and there was no industry on it, and just to eat those oysters right out of the water, that to me, there's nothing better. So always that is going to be probably my favorite. I've eaten in the gastronomic temples all over France and Italy and New York, and I, I just nothing's better to me than the oyster right there from the source.
Absolutely. Um, the oyster farming, they're, cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay. Um, and I don't think
I
people,
wrote a lot about oysters in the Chesapeake for the Washington Post when I was living in Washington. We lived in Washington from 2004 to 2011. Um, yeah, oysters, nothing like it.
yeah, I was going to say minuet, cocktail sauce, or all natural, but I think you answered that question.
Oh, naturel. If the
Ah,
oysters are salty and taste like the water,
um,
I don't put anything on them.
you were very much involved in founding Southern Foodways. Can you
Yes.
tell people what Southern Foodways is or does?
The Southern Foodways Alliance, we began, gosh, I don't even remember when we began, in the 90s, I guess, or maybe around 2000. It was an organization of people, not all just all food writers, who wanted to preserve um, some of the traditions and traditional foods of the South. And it's based in the University of Mississippi, and they have conferences, and it's become a huge organization now with its outreach. They do films, they do newsletters, and publish books.
I recommend people to look it up, Southern Foodways. And you cover so many different items. I'm going to show the book again. There we go.
Yeah, there's an essay about dancing in there. There's an essay about insomnia and death. There's an essay about fishing. It's not just food, but it's mostly food.
Right, but you've lived so many places. So you lived in Genoa. So you talk about how the Italians there do pesto. You talk about minestrone soup or minestrone.
Yeah, I think there are more Italian recipes than anything in the book. My years in Genoa really influenced my cooking more than anything. I mean, of course, I'm known as a low country cook, and and I wrote for a French magazine, lived in France as well. And since then, of course, I've lived in Eastern Europe and in China and now in Cambodia. But I think my time in Genoa really impacted the way I cook more than anything else, even more than my mother or living in the low country or growing up on the boat or anything. It's what I am. I'm really an Italian cook. It's how I cook.
Well, I think you wrote a cookbook on frying. I call it The Fear of Frying.
Yeah, Fearless Frying it's called, I think.
Right, but I have the fear of frying.
Yeah.
I just don't. Frying? Yeah, I don't deep fry. Just all that oil and stuff. Just
I always hear this about, it's such a mess. There's something wrong, but cooking's a mess. There's banana peels. There's bones. Cooking's a mess. I mean, there's a lot of garbage. And to me, the oil is just another banana peel.
Well, I understand that. Probably the best fried chicken I had was Scott Peacock. Scott it was Women Chefs and Restaurateurs. It was down in Atlanta. It was the conference. The centerpieces were, oh God, I can't remember her name. I have her on the show. Nancy did the cakes, all Southern cakes, caramel cake, whatever.
Nancy McDermott.
Thank you. Yeah. Nancy, forgive me. I'm at the age things disappear very quickly out of my head. And it was her cakes, coconut cake and the caramel cake. But when we came out, the centerpiece were these platters of Scott Peacock's fried chicken. And he only did it once a week in his restaurant because the grease was everywhere for the frying. The best fried chicken that ever passed my lips. Unbelievable.
People here in Cambodia, when I'm having a dinner party, almost invariably they'll ask me to fry chicken. I had a dinner party for 10 on Saturday, and we started with champagne, and I made both little sausage biscuits, not big like hearty sausage biscuit, but they're a little biscuit that has cooked sausage in it. Sausage biscuits and cheese straws with champagne, and then we had fried chicken, rice and butter beans and gravy and homemade chow chow and sliced tomatoes. And what else did we have? And for dessert, I made bread pudding with whiskey sauce. It was a huge feast. But there were 10 people and there were 47 pieces of chicken. And at the end of the meal, there were 6 pieces left. So 10 people ate 41 pieces of chicken.
Well, that's good. Bonnie Cleveland's back in here. She says, what are a few things you think it would benefit casual cooks to know that they generally don't?
What kind of cooks? That would benefit what?
Casual cooks, the regular cooks. What do you think? What few things would benefit the general casual home cook that they generally don't know?
Huh. Well, Bonnie, I know, she actually bought our house in Charleston when we left from there. And she is an avid gardener. And I'd say, Bonnie, keep it simple. Just don't do too much to those tomatoes. Just slice them and eat them or eat them over the kitchen sink. I think people, I think people are, I don't know, I think people are afraid of recipes or take them too seriously. I always encourage uh, cooks to read a recipe all the way through, then read it again all the way through, and
Absolutely.
and understand what you're going to be doing. And yes, assemble your mise en place, get all your ingredients together and all, and and understand what you're doing before you go to do it. And then if you want to follow it, fine. I mean, this is something I learned from my mother. She had this vast culinary library, and she, we're in this little town in South Carolina, but she would get the grocers to order things that they wouldn't normally have. And so, say she had a piece of veal, she, which normally wasn't something that she could get, she'd go to her library, she'd pull down and maybe the Time Life book on beef and veal, or she would pull one of the French masters down because they eat a lot of veal there, or an Italian cookbook, and read and see what these good cookbook authors had to say about um, veal, the cut of veal she had, and get her own idea of what to do. And then she'd go in the kitchen, and none of her cookbooks ever went in the kitchen, and they were all in pristine condition when I inherited them from her. And if she did want to follow a recipe, she did what I do to these days. To this day, I scribble notes like down on a piece of paper and take them into the kitchen, use a magnet, put it on the hood over the stove, and follow it then. But I think people, need to let their freak flag fly a little bit more in the kitchen. And keep it simple. Let the ingredients speak for themselves. You know,
Right.
I read these recipes that have all of these ingredients in there, and especially in baking, they'll have all of these different spices uh, in a cake, and I think, well, are you going to taste them? I never add anything to a recipe unless I think that I will either one taste it itself or that it will enhance another flavor. Um, it's it really keeping things simple is
Right. Right.
it's and fresh and local.
What I want to tell people is that the royalties from Charleston to Phnom Penh are donated to a trust funding for immersive language in high school, for immersive language for high school students.
Yes. The way this came about is Michael, my husband, and I both know the doors that have opened for us because of our foreign language skills. We also know the doors that have been slammed shut to us for lack of those skills. I have an older sister, Nancy, who has been teaching in public schools for teaching Spanish for, I think, 57 years now. She's still teaching, and she's really an inspiration to me. And Michael's best friends are actually an older couple who got us together. They ran uh, programs in Latin America. Jim was the USAID director in the Dominican Republic, and their Spanish language skills helped them, and they got Michael interested in international development. He went and got a master's at Columbia. Anyway, we decided that all of the royalties from the book would go into a trust. We established the trust, we put some money in the trust. Not only will the royalties go into the trust, but when we die, all of our assets will go into the trust. And then they will be transferred to the American Field Service which sponsors foreign exchange students. When I was in high school in this little town, Orangeburg, South Carolina, and I had these two older sisters. So for the 6 years that they and I were in high school, the American Field Service sent a foreign exchange student every year, and they came into our home, and I took French, and then I minored in French in college. And I, to this day, I remember these foreign exchange students. I mean, I remember every one of them: Martin Guillot and Sigrid Mueller and Klaus Bender and Fernando Cortés Pedrosa and Sergio Ramon Lopez. These people opened my eyes to a world outside of the United States. And actually, we've designated places south of the United States in Spanish language as where this study should be, because even though 40 million Americans speak Spanish, we're woefully ignorant of our neighbors to the south. And we just thought that it would be a really good way
Wonderful.
to for our legacy.
Right. Like I said, we can continue to talk, but I want to ask you some of my favorite questions when I close out the show.
Okay.
Okay. And I sort of know this answer, but maybe not. What was your ultimate culinary fail?
Wow. Well, Dara, I've been developing recipes for 40 years, and I've had, people think that I'm a great cook. I'm not really a great cook. I keep it simple. But I have thrown away more things you can't imagine. I've developed hundreds and hundreds of recipes, and if a recipe of mine is in a book, I've cooked it at least 3 times the way it is presented in the book. But before those 3 times, there may be 5 or 6 times that were utter failures. So, I haven't had an ultimate one. There is a fun story in the book about why I don't make wedding cakes. I actually was able to salvage that cake with the help of a friend, but
people have to buy the book. Don't ask me. One of the chapters. Don't ask me to make a wedding cake. It's really quite fun.
Dropped cakes before. I've made soups that were too salty. I've caught things on fire before. I can't think of one. I've had too many.
Well, Michael Taylor says, "Tell my brother hello."
Oh, hey, Mike.
Okay. All right. If you woke up tomorrow morning with a new talent, what would it be?
Oh, that's easy. I would like to be able to read music the way I can read a recipe. I can read a recipe and absolutely taste it. I understand all the elements. I took piano lessons when I was young. I didn't like my teacher, and I wasn't very good at it. And I love music, and I can follow the melody, sing along like in church or something. But I can't read music, and that is the one thing I would love to be able to do. To read the music and hear it in my head.
As you read the notes, yeah.
Right.
What piece of advice, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would that be?
Learn to sing. Learn to read music. Learn to sing, especially.
Well, we know you dance, so now you.
No, I love to dance.
Yeah. That's good. And what didn't I ask you that I probably should have?
Oh, you didn't ask about what's next. Of course, none of us really know what's next, do we? But
so what's next?
We're moving to Vietnam. In 2 months from today, we're moving to Vietnam. And even though I've been in Cambodia next door for 3.5 years because of COVID, we haven't been. And so we're very excited about that. I don't know what else you could have asked me. Um,
Well, there's probably
what's for
tons.
dinner? What's
I
for
did.
dinner?
What's? Oh, that is a question here. What was your best bite this week?
My best bite this week. Um, ooh, there was a, does wine count?
Yeah, we'll let it count.
I had a really nice, I had a really nice Pomerol. That was the 2015 Pomerol. That was really nice. But the best bite, let's see. I had some really good oysters a couple of nights ago. Probably the best bite I had was my fried chicken last Saturday. But yesterday I made something I don't make very often. But and I don't have a sweet tooth. But I love dried fruit, and I made. I usually make fruit cakes at this time of year, but yesterday I made some really gooey, chewy, um, booze
Oh,
soaked oatmeal raisin cookies that are just. They were pretty good. That's probably
okay.
the best bite I've had this week.
Okay. Okay. Everybody, John Martin Taylor, Hoppin' John. Check him out, hoppinjohns.net. And if you couldn't remember it before, we're back again. Charleston to Phnom Penh by John Martin Taylor. It is just out. Get it. You have 30 recipes, great stories. And I thank you so much for staying up and coming to us live from Cambodia. I've done Israel, so I think this is the farthest point right now. So we've done that. And as
Well,
I with
happy Hanukkah. I know that's just right on the corner.
right, and real quickly, give us an idea what your holiday table is going to look like.
My holiday table. Hmm. I think it's going to be potluck at a friend's house.
That's good. That's good.
So we never know.
That's great. John, good health, good wealth,
It's
safe
great. It's great to
travels.
see you. It's great to see you again, Dara. I mean, it's been 10 years since we saw each other in Baltimore, So
Has it been that long? Yeah. Well,
yeah, it was the 20th anniversary edition of the Low Country book. It's
yeah,
like,
time
wow,
flies.
where's the
A
time
big
go?
mwah, stay
Yeah.
well, best regards. Thank you again. All right, everyone. I just love speaking to John. He's just the best storyteller. Next week's guest will be Allie Bandier, family wellness consultant, founder of Senta Health. Allie is a registered dietitian with a master's in nutrition. She specializes in prenatal, postnatal, and pediatric nutrition. We're going to be covering healthy eating for the holidays, eating for your baby's health, and more. And the latest J More magazine is out. Here we go. It's on the stands, free here in Baltimore, or you can contact the website, jmoreliving.com, and you can have it sent to you. Theme is aging gratefully, and I actually wrote a story in there. So if you grab one, look for that and get back to me and let me know what you think. If you need to reach me, you can reach me at food@jmoreliving.com. That's my email. My Instagram is @DaraCooks. Give me a follow. All shows are immediately archived in video form up on J More Living's Facebook page and jmoreliving.com. Feel free to dig into our archives and watch past shows. Great guests, a lot of great stories. So if this is your first time tuning in, hit the archives. I think you'll enjoy them. We truly appreciate when you share the shows with your friends. It helps it grow and it keeps a small roof over my head. And again, share with your friends. And as I like to end my show, may your plates always, always remain full. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next Thursday.